truth is the foundation of meaningful relationships. Stop lying to keep peace. At the heart of every healthy relationship lies one uncompromising element: truth. Not half-truths, not silence that masquerades as maturity, not passive acceptance that disguises resentment, but raw, honest, sometimes uncomfortable truth. And yet, in our desperation to preserve harmony, we often sacrifice the truth at the altar of peace. That sacrifice is never without consequence. You might think that withholding your true feelings is harmless. That saying, "and I'm fine," when you're clearly not, is just being kind. That going along with things to avoid conflict is a way of keeping the relationship intact. But that's not kindness, it's deception. And over time, deception corrodes connection like rust on steel. You might avoid immediate conflict by staying silent, but you're laying the groundwork for long-term chaos. Why do we do it? Because we fear the fallout of truth. We worry that if we express our real needs, the other person will reject us. We imagine the arguments, the misunderstandings, the uncomfortable silence that follows an honest statement. But let me ask you this. What kind of relationship are you preserving if it only survives on the condition that you suppress who you really are? When you lie, by omission, by compliance, by pretending, you don't just betray the other person. You betray yourself. You chip away at your self-respect. You become an actor in your own life, performing roles instead of living authentically. And that's a deeply dangerous place to be, because over time, you lose sight of who you actually are. Telling the truth is not just about confronting others, it's about aligning your outer world with your inner reality. When you say what you mean, you give others a chance to actually know you. Not the version of you that panders to expectations, but the real, living, breathing, feeling human being behind the mask. And here's the thing. If someone cannot handle the real you, then you're better off knowing that sooner rather than later. A relationship that depends on your silence to survive is not a safe relationship. It's a hostage situation. Now, telling the truth doesn't mean being harsh or cruel. It doesn't mean unloading every frustration the moment you feel it. It means speaking with clarity and courage. It means learning to say, "I felt hurt when that happened," instead of pretending it didn't matter. It means saying, "I need more support," rather than hoping someone will read your mind. And yes, it takes strength. Yes, it can cause temporary friction. But that friction is far healthier than the slow disintegration that comes from constant self-abandonment. There's a high cost to avoiding truth: emotional disconnection, chronic resentment, the unbearable weight of unspoken words that eventually turn into bitterness. And sometimes, even when you try to continue giving, you'll find yourself growing colder, more sarcastic, more passive-aggressive. That's what happens when you lie for too long. You can't even give authentically anymore because the core of the connection is hollowed out. But when you choose truth, even awkward, trembling truth, you build relationships on solid ground. You allow for real intimacy, the kind that's not based on control, performance, or manipulation. You make space for mutual understanding, and you set a precedent. This relationship will be grounded in honesty, not illusion. Some people will walk away when you start speaking the truth. Let them. That's not your loss, that's clarity. Because anyone who demands a version of you that's silent and compliant doesn't want a partner. They want a puppet. So if you want to stop overgiving in relationships, the first step isn't learning to say no. It's learning to say what's real. Start small. Start with, "You need time to think about that," or "It actually didn't feel okay to me." Speak it awkwardly if you must, fumble the words, shake in your voice. But say them, because every time you choose truth over peacekeeping, you choose growth over stagnation, reality over fantasy, and ultimately you choose yourself. And that's where genuine, respectful, mutual love can begin. Not with how much you give, but with how honestly you live. Resentment is a boundary detection system. Don't ignore its message. Resentment is not just a feeling. It is a signal, an emotional flare shot into the sky of your inner world, demanding your attention. And like any meaningful signal, it carries critical information. Something is wrong. A boundary has been crossed. Your needs have been ignored. Your values may be under threat. Yet many of us are taught to ignore resentment. We're told to be a bigger person, to let it go, to not take things personally. We internalize the belief that resentment is a weakness, an emotional flaw we must push aside in order to maintain harmony. But here's the truth: resentment is not weakness, it's wisdom. When you feel resentment in a relationship, any relationship, it's almost always because you've violated your own boundary or allowed someone else to. Maybe you said yes when you wanted to say no. Maybe you gave and gave and gave, hoping that eventually it would be reciprocated. Maybe you let a hurtful comment slide to keep the peace, even though it left a sting in your chest that you're still carrying days later. And then, quietly, subtly, resentment starts to grow. Resentment is your psyche's way of saying, "Tish, hey, that wasn't right. You're not okay with this. Something needs to change." And the longer you ignore that voice, the louder it becomes. It builds over time, like pressure in a pipe. You might think you're being strong by holding it in, but what you're really doing is deferring an explosion. And when it comes, it's usually messy, because you've waited so long that your response is no longer measured or clear. It's a reaction, not a decision. But it doesn't have to get to that point. You can learn to work with resentment as a teacher instead of treating it like a toxic emotion to be exiled. You can pause when you feel it and ask yourself the hard, honest questions. What expectation did I have that went unmet? Where did I give too much, too quickly, without asking for anything in return? Did I communicate my limits clearly, or did I hope someone would magically know them? Am I trying to earn love through sacrifice rather than mutuality? See, resentment often arises when you abandon yourself in the name of someone else's comfort. When you consistently put your partner's needs ahead of your own without negotiation, when you override your feelings in favor of theirs, resentment is inevitable. It's the cost of living inauthentically, of putting on a mask that says, "I'm okay," while your inner self is screaming for relief. And let's be very clear, this doesn't make you a victim. This makes you responsible. Because while others may take advantage, it is still your job to uphold your boundaries. It is your job to listen to your resentment and treat it as valuable feedback. It is your job to say, "This isn't working for me," and to either renegotiate or walk away if that message is ignored. That's what maturity looks like. Not avoiding resentment, but recognizing it early and acting on its wisdom. Some people will try to shame you for expressing resentment. They'll say you're being selfish, dramatic, or too sensitive. But boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are how you protect what matters. Without them, you don't have a relationship. You have a performance and a slow death of self-worth. Here's the paradox: the more you listen to your resentment and honor your own boundaries, the less resentful you become. Because you begin to live in alignment. You stop saying yes when you mean no. You stop trying to be everything for everyone. You give from a place of wholeness, not obligation, and that shift changes everything. When you speak up early, when you acknowledge that quiet twinge of frustration and say, "This doesn't feel right to me," you prevent that twinge from becoming a deep well of bitterness. You stop the pattern of overgiving and under-receiving. You create space for honesty, negotiation, and growth. So the next time you feel resentment creeping in, don't suppress it. Listen. Explore it. Let it guide you to the unmet need, the breached boundary, the broken agreement. Because resentment, when honored and understood, is not the end of connection. It is the beginning of self-respect. And without self-respect, no relationship can truly thrive. Stop mistaking your worth for your usefulness. There's a dangerous lie that many people, especially those who overgive in relationships, have internalized without even realizing it. The lie is this: I am only as valuable as what I can offer. It's the belief that your love must be earned, that your presence must be justified, that your role in someone's life depends entirely on how much you do, fix, give, or sacrifice. You may not say it aloud, but you live it, through late-night favors, unreciprocated efforts, chronic self-neglect, and a quiet terror that if you stop being useful, you will be discarded. This belief doesn't come out of nowhere. Many people grow up in environments where love was conditional. You were praised when you helped, when you served, when you achieved. Maybe your emotional needs were brushed aside, but your tasks were rewarded. Maybe you learned early on that the way to feel needed or safe was to be indispensable. And so you carried that into adulthood, into your relationships, into your identity. But here's the truth. Being needed is not the same as being valued. Being useful is not the same as being loved. If someone only keeps you close because of what you can do for them, your emotional labor, your caretaking, your consistency, then they don't love you. They love the function you serve. And that's not love, that's convenience. When you measure your worth by your usefulness, you put yourself in a perpetual cycle of performance. You become afraid to say no, afraid to rest, afraid to express your own needs because you think it will make you less valuable to the other person. You silence your exhaustion. You push past your limits. And all the while, your self-worth becomes tied to a job description instead of your humanity. Eventually, that leads to resentment, burnout, and disconnection. You start to feel invisible, not because others don't see you, but because you've stopped allowing yourself to be seen outside of what you can provide. You're no longer a person in a relationship, you're a service provider wearing a smile. But you are not a utility. You are not a tool. You are a complex, emotional, living being who deserves to be valued for who you are, not what you do. Think about this. When was the last time someone asked how you were doing, without needing something in return? When was the last time you received affection, appreciation, or care? Not because you earned it, but just because you exist and matter. If those moments are rare or only follow acts of service, then the relationship is not in balance, and balance is crucial. Because love is not meant to be transactional. It is meant to be mutual. If you feel like you have to earn your place in someone's life, then you are not in a relationship, you are in a survival strategy. So how do you begin to untangle your worth from your usefulness? First, you have to believe that your presence is enough, that your feelings matter even when you're not helping, that you're allowed to rest without guilt, that you don't have to be exceptional to be deserving of love. Second, you need to start saying no, not out of spite, but out of self-respect. Every time you say no to something that drains you, you're saying yes to your own well-being. You're training yourself and others to recognize that your energy is not unlimited and your boundaries are not negotiable. Third, observe who remains in your life when you stop over-functioning. Some people will leave. Let them. Their departure is not a reflection of your inadequacy. It's a revelation of their dependency on your self-sacrifice. And that's a truth you need to see clearly, no matter how painful it is. Finally, begin to surround yourself with people who value you without conditions, people who care when you're struggling, who offer as much as they take, who want your presence more than your performance. These are the people who help you remember your intrinsic worth, even when you're not doing anything to earn it. Your worth is not a commodity. It's not a currency to be traded for love, safety, or attention. It is inherent, immutable, non-negotiable. So stop tying your value to how useful you are. Stop pouring yourself out for people who only come to drink, and start showing up as someone who knows, without apology, without exception, that they are enough, not because of what you give, but because of who you are. Demand reciprocity, not out of selfishness, but out of self-respect. At the core of every healthy relationship lies a basic but often overlooked principle: reciprocity. It's not a luxury or a bonus. It's the foundation of emotional balance. And yet, many people who struggle with overgiving hesitate to ask for reciprocity. Why? Because they confuse it with being selfish. But there's a vital distinction that needs to be made here. Asking for reciprocity is not selfish. It is an act of self-respect. Let's be honest. If you are constantly giving your time, energy, care, and attention without receiving anything in return, that is not love. That is exploitation. Even if it's not intentional on the other person's part, the result is the same. You feel drained, unappreciated, and invisible. And no relationship can survive on one person's effort indefinitely. Now, you might say, but I give because I want to, not because I expect anything back. And yes, giving can be generous and loving, but when it's habitual and one-sided, it becomes a strategy for worthiness. You're giving in hopes of being valued. You're earning your place in the relationship, hoping that eventually the other person will realize how much you matter. But relationships don't work like vending machines. You don't put in more kindness to get out more love. It doesn't work that way, unless the dynamic is reciprocal. Reciprocity doesn't mean keeping score. It doesn't mean demanding exact equality in every exchange. It means mutual effort, mutual care, and mutual respect. It means that both people are emotionally invested, not just in each other's needs, but in the overall health of the relationship. When you give love, you should also feel love. When you support someone, you should feel supported. When you show up, you should not be the only one standing there. And here's the thing. People will often take what you offer them without asking whether they should. That doesn't necessarily make them bad, it makes them human. If you teach someone that you don't need anything, that you'll be there no matter what, that you don't require care or consideration, they will start to believe you. Not because they're cruel, but because you've trained them to. You've normalized the imbalance. So what do? You speak up. You ask. You expect. Not out of entitlement, but because you respect yourself enough to no longer accept crumbs when you're offering the whole table. You say, need to feel seen here. You say, cis dynamic isn't working for me. You say, you need more support, more presence, more honesty, whatever it is you're missing. And yes, you risk discomfort, you risk rejection. But you also open the door to real intimacy. And let's be clear, people who truly care about you will want to reciprocate. They may not know how at first, especially if they've been used to your silence or constant giving. But if they value you, they will listen, they will make changes, they will show up. And if they don't, if they dismiss your needs, minimize your feelings, or call you too much for asking, then they were never willing to meet you halfway in the first place. One of the most powerful things you can do in a relationship is raise your standard. Not as a power move, but as a declaration of your worth. Stop proving that you're lovable by how much you tolerate. Stop measuring your value by how much you give. Instead, start honoring the fact that your needs are just as important as anyone else's. This shift won't be easy, especially if your identity is wrapped up in being the helper, the healer, the fixer. But here's the truth. You are not here to rescue people at the cost of your own well-being. You are not here to carry emotional loads that were never yours to begin with. You are not here to earn love through self-sacrifice. You are here to connect, to share, to grow, to experience love that is balanced, mutual, and sustainable. So start demanding reciprocity, not with anger, but with clarity, not with manipulation, but with honesty. You don't need to explain it. You don't need to apologize for it. You simply need to embody it. Because the moment you stop overgiving and start expecting what you truly deserve is the moment you stop settling and start building the kind of relationships that reflect your self-worth instead of draining it.